Welcome back into the Red Zone Podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UU football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime beat reporter and now columnist Jim Polzin. And it is a slower week than we anticipated, for me
Maybe
at least.
For you, pal.
Yeah, I was about to say, for me, Jim's cranking out things. You can check him out on madison.com. But slower week for me in the football side of our beat here at the State Journal. I thought we were going to be prepping for a Big Ten championship game, and we're sitting in the Minnesota press box watching Michigan put the final touches on a pretty dominant win over Ohio State. And I'm like, ooh, I actually thought Wisconsin had a chance against those guys, and now I'm not sure. And then sure enough, they go out and lose in Minnesota and didn't have a chance to play in the game at all. So that 23-13 loss ends the regular season 8-4, and now we're sitting here waiting for a bowl game announcement on Sunday. Jim, I know you've been seeing it all over the place. For as positive as the bandwagon had started to get toward the end of the regular season here, it hit a telephone pole, rolled over in the ditch, and then caught on fire, it seems like.
Yeah, you knew it, and you knew that's all it would take for that to happen. But I think the shocking thing, like for me, I'll fully admit it, is I didn't really see that coming. Thought they might struggle to win that game. Didn't know that it would necessarily be a blowout, but I did not envision a scenario where they lose it, and that completely changes the narrative of the season. I mean, heck, I wrote Saturday leading in on how we should look at this divisional title if it happens, because it was a pretty tough Big Ten West, and considering what they did after 1-3, I thought it was really impressive. And then that story runs Friday afternoon into Saturday, and it's basically obsolete by about 5:30 or 6 o'clock on Saturday night.
Yeah, and I remember one of the lines in that column, and I wrote about it too this week, like the idea of having a full trophy case again after, they didn't have one or they got one in 19 and then obviously not in 20, but then, they had a chance at it again here in 21. It didn't happen. So we'll give you a quick rundown of the show here. We're going to talk about that Minnesota loss, kind of the big takeaways from that. And, we're not going to talk too much about bowl predictions. There's really only three. To give you a quick, synopsis here. The Outback Bowl, Music City Bowl, and the Las Vegas Bowl. Those are the three you're looking at. I don't see the Badgers ending up anywhere else. We'll see what ends up happening on Saturday between Iowa and Michigan for the Big Ten title. That could change some things, but I think those are the three you're looking at as a Badger fan. So we'll talk about that stuff, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what's next for this program. I know Jim's working on a column on that, and then I've got some stuff coming up this week as well, kind of looking at this season, regular season, I should say, as a whole. And then we're going to talk about the Big Ten title game really quick, make our picks there, and give you a recap of our season-long pick parade. So we will be right back after this. All right, Jim, we're going to start off talking about this Minnesota loss because this one felt different just in terms of watching it and then the way that this game played out, because not a lot went right for the Badgers. You look at the other losses this season, and there are three others you can take a look at. There was a snowball effect from something, like a turnover or an injury. Like, you look at these games, the kickoff return against Notre Dame, there was one thing that happened, and then the wheels fell off. And maybe you could argue that in that Minnesota game, it was the interception from Graham Mertz that turned into the go-ahead touchdown for Minnesota. But the offense came back on the field right after that and drove down and tied the game. Probably should have scored a touchdown there, just in terms of what they were doing in the red zone. We'll get into that a little bit, but it wasn't the same way of like the tidal wave hit after the bad event in a game like we saw in other games and other losses this season. This was just sloppy and just not good football throughout pretty much the whole game offensively, and then the defense had its moments. Obviously, the pick six was big for the defense, but just didn't get off the field when they could, and never got them in the third and long, wouldn't let the pass rush get going. And when they blitzed, they kept getting burned because it was 3rd and 4 and 5. Like, there was a whole lot of space that Minnesota could work with, and it just wasn't a buttoned-up performance. And that's something that we've kind of come to expect from this Badger team this year, like in the second half of the season, where they stopped beating themselves. And I kind of feel like they got back to that against Minnesota.
Yeah, and I thought I want to say something. Minnesota, was impressive in a couple of regards. We went in that game knowing that they had no chance to win the Big Ten West, and I didn't know what kind of mental effect that would have on them, in psychology, in terms of psychology. They came out ready, and I really thought that Wilder play right off the bat energized the crowd, and I think it energized Minnesota's sidelines, getting him kicked out of the game and that penalty right off the bat. And then I just thought Minnesota's defensive front seven was really relentless from start to finish, and I think that set a tone in this game. And I just think it's so hard for Wisconsin, if their running game isn't working, for them to do much else. And we've seen that over and over in really for a long time now. And we saw it again Saturday. And that was the one thing, is like you just never felt like they were going to get enough momentum going offensively to grab control of the game.
Yeah, and you mentioned the front seven. We should start there because Minnesota's front seven did a really good job. Their defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi, called a ton of run blitzes and a lot of things to just take away what the Badgers have been doing well throughout the year. And I've talked on this podcast many times about how early in the games Wisconsin's offensive line and the offense has been calling a lot of straightforward runs, and even that stuff wasn't. I don't think they called enough of them, but even that stuff wasn't working well because that front seven was flying around and really just kind of throwing their bodies to the wind. Like if you go back and rewatch that game, some of these linebackers, like Sori Marin, who's a very good player, was just throwing himself into Joe Tippmann or Jack Nelson on some pulls, on some zone blocks, and just blowing things up. And to do that play after play after play takes a pretty impressive mentality. And like you said, in a game that is just for bragging rights, it's just for the rivalry's sake. So we'll get into it in a little bit, but that's part of why I think fans are so disappointed in this game, because you said it after the game. I think you said in your column too. It felt like Minnesota wanted that worse.
Yeah.
When everything was on the line for Wisconsin, it seemed like Minnesota was playing with more fire and more passion for that individual game. Yeah,
which was surprising. I mean, I think that what I wrote is like they wanted it more, they needed it more, and that was the surprising part to me, because I get how this rivalry and the playing for the Axe means something, but it also meant something to Wisconsin, right? I mean, that's all they talked about all week. They didn't talk about the division title. They talked about winning the Axe and how important it was and how much it hurt to lose it back in 2018. But Wisconsin also had this other carrot dangling and winning the division title, and possibly at that point they knew that Michigan won and that there was, probably a better chance that they could even win the Big Ten title. And it just, I didn't see a lack of, I didn't see fire that I thought I would see. And then worse yet, they were undisciplined in a lot of areas. And just, I think the closer that game stayed, the first, Wisconsin's winning at halftime, and the interception kind of turned things. And I just think the pressure from that point on was all on Wisconsin, and they did not handle it well.
They didn't. And speaking of that pressure, you mentioned, and we talked about how well the front seven from Minnesota was playing and really taking away Braylon Allen. And this was the first time that a team has been able to expose the lack of depth that Wisconsin had. Clearly, Braylon Allen was not healthy. He was running, I'm not going to say scared, but timid. He was slower to the line. He was clearly trying to let things set up in front of him and then turn on the jets. Just wasn't working with the way Minnesota was pursuing. And the way that they were getting so much penetration and getting back there so fast, when Braylon Allen would get the ball, instead of being able to read where linebackers are going and then make his cuts off of that, he was having to cut off of them immediately, and then the pursuit got there. So just not a good day for the running attack at all. And then you said it before, but that's a game where you need the passing attack to complement your offense and really carry your offense because of how well that front seven was playing. And they had opportunities. Receivers were open. There were plays we're going to get into. Graham Mertz was not sharp. This was probably his worst game since that Michigan game, or maybe a little bit before that.
I'm trying to think if, definitely the Michigan game. I mean,
they took the ball out of his hands against Purdue. I guess but he still
Illinois. He wasn't asked to do much, right?
Right.
I mean,
but in terms of a game that he needed to do something and had a lot of opportunities to do it, this was his worst game in a while, and it's one of those things where if you're a Wisconsin fan, I understand the confusion and the frustration for a guy like Graham Mertz, because we've seen him make throws in the last 2 months that not a lot of Wisconsin quarterbacks could make, and then some pretty easy ones against Minnesota in a huge spot fall at receivers' feet. The fundamentals weren't there. It's just like where the roller coaster of this dude at a position that Wisconsin for generations will settle for a low bar as long as you stay at that bar the entire time. It's maddening if you're a Wisconsin fan.
And I thought the funny thing is he started out well, right? I mean, he hits what,
I think it was a 5 or 6
5
or
5.
6.
His first throw, both of you and I commented on it, was to Danny Davis, kind of
play action with an extra tackle. Like everything say, hey, we're going to run play action, bang, get a good big play.
Yeah, and so I kind of thought, okay, he's this is the Graham Mertz we've seen the last 3-4 weeks, and then he just he missed on the one over the middle to Davis that could have gone for 6.
Late in the first half, that was a huge play. It was on a first down as well. It was the same type of situation. They had I believe they had an extra tackle out there. It's a 2-man route. Minnesota sent a run blitz. They had it protected. He just missed it.
Right, and you have to hit him because that's what will help the running game and will make Minnesota think twice about devoting so much attention to the run. You got to hit plays like that, and he just could not do it.
And you look at that first drive. So Minnesota gets the ball to start the game, has the ball for the basically half the quarter. It was about an 8-minute drive almost. They get a field goal. It's a big stop by the defense. Then Wisconsin gets the ball and drives right down, and they get to the red zone. They start getting jammed up in the run game there, and then Mertz has DK coming out of a slot out. It was a nice route, beat the defender, and the ball is just short.
Yeah.
There's no pressure, and it's one of those things where you don't want to put it all on the quarterback because everything's got to work right on a play, but protection's there, routes there, receivers there. At a certain point, you just got to put the ball on him, and he didn't there. And then you go to the first drive of the third quarter where you come out of halftime, okay, we didn't play very well offensively. Only score for our team right now was a touchdown by the defense on a pick 6. Let's get something going. First play, sprint out, bread and butter type of play that he's been doing well all year. Throws it at Kendrick Pryor's feet because he's fading away and doing things that he shouldn't and hasn't been for a while. And then 2 plays later throws the pick that changes the whole game. It was a game. I'm sure. I know talking to him after the game, he was mad at himself about how he played, but it's just one of those things where that's a game Graham Mertz has to play well in, knowing the situation, knowing what's happening to the run game, and he didn't, and that's a lot of why the Badgers are in the situation they're in.
Yeah, again, they didn't need him to be great. They haven't needed him to be great, but they needed him to be good, or at least okay, and to give them a chance. That the interception was huge, and there's a couple things there that we should talk about. The pass was poorly placed, right? That started the problem, and that's on Mertz. Kendrick Pryor did him no favors, I didn't think, by losing that 50-50 battle. It's just, and that's one of the things I pointed out in the Minnesota it seemed like they wanted it more because you have a freshman cornerback basically taking the ball away from a 6th-year senior wide receiver at a really pivotal moment. Leads to a touchdown the other way. That's the little things that add up in a game, and it's just that part of that's on Mertz, part of that's on Pryor. I don't love the play call. If we're easy to say now, but I don't love that play call. I'm kind of putting Mertz in that tough position of making that throw, but there's just a lot of things, and that it's not good. And I thought he had kind of turned the corner. That's kind of the worst part.
Yeah, this game felt like a big step back after we saw him make strides throughout this year, and really seemed like throughout that second stretch of the season, he was playing more on time and seeing the field better. And I don't think he put a ton of balls in harm's way. And maybe, I don't know, I'm not in his head, but maybe that was part of it. It's like he was so focused on not throwing another pick or not doing something that other parts of the throw mechanics weren't there. It's just all of that came together at the worst time for the Badgers, and it felt like early in the season where this offense just couldn't do anything, and they had a better chance of scoring with the defense on the field. But I do want to mention this: Graham Mertz is not without, or doesn't have, all the blame on him, because the defense gets a tie score again in the third quarter, immediately lets up a touchdown, and then from that point on, just could never get off the field or never get a big play when they needed it. And part of that's what Minnesota was doing, protecting Tanner Morgan really well, mixing up their protections in terms of when they kept 6 or 7 in the block, or when they were spreading some things out, or when they were calling play action or some of these delay routes. But you're talking about guys like Scott Nelson and John Torchio, who had to come in for Colin Wild, or just straight up losing tight ends on huge plays to either extend drives or kickstart them when you had them backed up and you get them out to midfield on one play. It's those types of plays you just can't have when you're in a situation as a defense that, one, you've been in before, you know your offense is struggling, but then two, you're against your rival and you got a chance to win the game as a defense.
And both those plays were similar in that both safeties got caught with their eyes looking in the backfield. And I get that Minnesota's running a lot of RPO stuff, and it's tricky, right? You've got to be disciplined. But those were two examples where Wisconsin was undisciplined and Minnesota took advantage. And big plays are going to make a close game either way, and that's exactly what happened. Minnesota took advantage of some really big plays and kind of kickstarted that offense. 'Cause that offense wasn't great all day, but they did have more big plays.
So Tanner Morgan went 6 for 6 on the first drive. Had a really good first drive, had a good script going. He went 5 for, what would that be, 12? 5 for 12 or 5 for 13 the rest of the game. But those 5 passes gained 142 yards and a touchdown. And a lot of it was because Minnesota would catch Wisconsin in these blitzes that have been working all year. I'm not faulting Jim Leonard for calling these blitzes, but it was one of those situations where you blitz, you put your corners, your safeties in man-to-man islands, and when they lose because the blitz doesn't get home, it's a huge play.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of people, putting the fault on the DBs there, and I get it. Like I don't think they played all that well in totality, but on certain plays like that, that's your defensive coordinator saying, hey, we better win pass rush-wise. We better go get a sack. We better go get a pressure and a throwaway because I'm putting you guys in a bad spot where you've got to defend a lot of field for if the defense doesn't or the rush doesn't get home for a lot of time.
Yeah, and we saw a little bit of different defense the last 2 weeks. It's why I was a little bit hesitant when the numbers were sparkling. I got a lot of questions in Open Gym and elsewhere is this Wisconsin's best defense ever? And I was cautious because I'm like, listen, we got to let this play out. We need to let this entire season play out and see where they're at the end of the season. And we saw the last 2 weeks, I don't want to say they're exposed, but we saw some things that teams were able to take advantage of. And that's why I was a little bit reluctant, to declare something until we had the whole picture. Was this a great defense? Yes. Is it the best ever defense at UW? I have a hard time saying that at this point. A lot of what this 8-4 record was a bad offense and the defense having to carry it. But I think there's some chances the last 2 weeks for this defense to kind of prove it was, superb, exceptional, whatever adjective you want to use, and we didn't see it enough.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and because when I posted my analysis after the game of how the pass rush not getting home was such a big deal, I got a lot of the offense scored 6 points. Right. I'm like, hey, I know. That's mentioned.
Yep.
That is the big focus. But if you wanted another story about the offense struggling, it's like we've talked about that all season. There's a line of hey, this is actually new. The pass rush didn't get home. So a tough day overall. But I think the worst part about it, Jim, if you're a Badger fan watching that game, is we mentioned that Minnesota looked like it wanted it more, and then Wisconsin was just disorganized. They had that play in the first half, I believe, where it was 3rd and 1. They were subbing out, a normal package for the jumbo package, and Jack Eschenbach is running off the field, and they're trying to call him back. The sideline is not telling him to go back in the play until he gets to the sideline. So when he runs back out on the field at 9 seconds left on the play clock, they try to run up and do it, but they have to call a timeout. It's you're running a quarterback sneak or a fullback dive. It's 3rd and 1. You guys are Wisconsin. Let's not fool around here. We know what we're doing.
Right.
Try it with 10.
Yeah.
That just bothered me to a point of you weren't going to do anything exotic with Jack Eschenbach out there anyway. But then on top of it, there were other points where they had procedural penalties and things. You watch their offensive line throughout the game, their tight ends, they are not coming off the ball in sync. Credit Minnesota's crowd making it loud and playing difficult there, but this is a pretty veteran unit up front outside of guys like Jack Nelson who are playing in their first year overall, but you've got to get that in sync because that was also part of it. You saw Minnesota's defensive front making contact with guys who are just getting out of their stance because the ball's already been snapped. And there's a disorganized effort, all kind of culminating with that punt play that's been dissected and talked about a lot since Saturday. But just you're down 10 points and you send the punt unit out. I honestly, because I've talked about this a few times with some friends and everything, I feel like somebody, whether it's Paul Christ, Chris Herring, whoever is making the decision, it all of it obviously goes down to Paul Christ at the end of the day. Somebody forgot to score. You can't ever – you're not punting down 2 scores the rest of the game. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Somebody forgot to score.
It's why it's so confusing to me. The whole thing was confusing. Like you and I were talking in the moment was like, you're like, are they going to fake this? Because it made zero sense to punt in that situation. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to fake a punt because Minnesota certainly would have known it was coming. Mm. But at least that wasn't, to me, waving the white flag. And until the false start, that's very much what they were going to do there. I don't know. I have a hard time, and I know we kind of disagree on this. I have a hard time believing that this was a Chris Herring issue, that he sent out the punt unit. Certainly his job would be to have the punt unit ready to go, but the head coach at some point would have to communicate with his assistants, punt or we're going or whatever. And then when you see the punt team running out there, you would call them, right? You'd call them back. You'd do something. Yeah. It just was, I wonder, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. I just wonder if Paul Chryst was shell-shocked at that point. Everything, his team was so close to kind of resurrecting its season and getting back to Indy. It was very clear, no matter if they're going to punt or don't punt there, that they're going to lose that game. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if he was in a haze because the reality of how bad this was had hit him. And I don't know. And he lost his train of thought. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a really tough situation to figure out. Yeah,
and I'm with you in the sense that Paul Chryst, especially being the offensive play caller and the head coach, is at the end of the day the one that's sending out or making that call or talking about it. My only question would be if Herring, throughout the year, in clear punt situations, which that would be if you were in I don't even know if this is true, but if it's a one-score game, maybe that's a punt situation in your mind because you're saying, hey, let's save the timeouts and the defense, or hope the defense gets a stop. We get the ball back one last time. Maybe that's the thought process, but I agree. It's just a bad look overall, and maybe that shell shock idea works. But you would hope at this point a pretty veteran coach in Paul Chryst wouldn't.
It's no excuse. Don't get me wrong. Right. I mean, it's a bad look no matter what. I'm just trying to figure out.
The
why or how.
Put an explanation on something that was just so out of character and so like what are you doing at this point?
Because I'm sitting there watching and I'm like, wait, it's kind of like, what's going on here? What are they doing? Like,
yeah, and I'm as you mentioned, regardless of what happens that play, they're going to lose. So I'm writing and getting stuff together, and I don't really realize what's happening until I look up and John Chanel is false starting. I'm like, Vunovich was out there? What?
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, it was just a bad situation overall for the Badgers, and really, like I said, just put the capstone on that day, and you just look at that, the disorganization, the poor play overall, that just kind of puts it all in one sequence that just,
right. As if the loss didn't look bad enough, then that is just the cherry on the top.
Exactly.
Or probably not a cherry because cherries are
good.
Are good.
Yeah. As we kind of wrap up talking about that game, it kind of pushes us into the discussion of what's next for this program, because I wonder, and I think I talked to you about this after the game, but if they win that game, finish the regular season 9-3, you go to Big Ten championship game, if you're Paul Chryst, you can probably tell yourself, like, hey, we had a horrible start, the offensive line wasn't together, Graham was really struggling, all these things. My staff's fine, my ideas are fine, like, what we're doing is okay. You lose this game like this, I think if you weren't already thinking about making changes, this would kind of be, to me, the solidifier, like, okay, like we got to do something different, because Minnesota had a solid defense. It wasn't that good. No. They looked like the Michigan defense, what they were doing in Wisconsin, pushing them around and, bottling up the run game like that. To me, that if they weren't already considering it, Paul Chryst and the brain trust at Wisconsin, they've got to at least be considering it now. Like, hey, what would we do to avoid that ever happening again?
Right. I mean, and you got some numbers on your sheet. They're 30-16 over 4 seasons. That's one division title in 4 seasons. They are 12-7, I believe, over 2 seasons.
Big Ten West? Or
overall,
the last 2.
Yeah. So 12-7 over 2 seasons. So it's like, that's pretty mediocre, no matter how you look at it. So I also think, hey, Paul Chryst is 7 seasons in now. I just think there gets to be a time where you need to make changes just to help the program grow and go forward. And, I've probably good time to mention that I've got a column coming, or by the time this is out, actually the column will be out.
Yeah, madison.com.
Essentially that, outlining what some of those changes should be. Didn't call for any heads, but I think there are some obvious areas that Paul Chryst needs to look at, and we can get into those if you want. But basically, I don't know that he's going to. I really don't. I don't know that he's going to do the things that I'm suggesting he should take a look at doing, because there are some pretty big moves he can make, and he has not shown in 7 years. He hasn't fired anyone.
Right.
He has not fired anybody.
That's pretty amazing. If
it
you look at
it
college
really
football.
is. Yeah, it is. And I make a little bit of a comparison to Iowa and Kirk Ferentz. Even Ferentz fired a couple position coaches, I believe, after the 2016 season. So, he's done it. Paul Chryst has had guys leave, but he's never told anybody to leave. And that's, it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you have guys that you're loyal to and like on your staff. But I think for the sake of this program, if this program is what he cares about, I think at times you need to consider big moves.
Yeah. Instead of talking about it here, make sure you go on madison.com and check out Jim's story, because I've read it already, and I know it's very factual and just gets to the point of something has to change here, because Wisconsin right now is fine. They're good.
Yep.
Not great. And these people are competitors. That's not good enough, like at a certain level. And then, like we talked about earlier, like this defense was right up there with some of the best we've ever seen at Wisconsin. And I personally think they got wore down toward the end of the year. No, not that I don't know much nearly as much about football as Jim Leonard has forgotten, but I think part of that was how much he played as starters throughout the year. I think they could have done a little bit better job getting the second string guys in earlier in games or in different spots to save some snaps. That's a discussion for another time. But overall, you have to look at this program as a whole and say, to make a next step, like, we've got to change something. Like, I don't think you can have the last two seasons go as they did, where offense struggles, defense tries to carry it, eventually falters against better competition, and then run it back.
And special teams doesn't
special
help
teams
get you over the top,
negative,
right? Yeah. So, right. I mean, and the thing is, the league around him is better. And that's what I wrote in the Saturday piece, the column leading into the game, is that the Big Ten West is better. PJ Fleck is a way better coach than Tim Brewster and
Right.
Tracy Claeys was. Jeff Brom is a pretty good coach down at Purdue. I think Brett Bielema is probably going to get it going at Illinois to some degree. Ferentz is still there.
Nebraska puts a scare in you every
Nebraska,
year.
I know they were. Again, it's funny to keep saying it, but they were the best 3-9 team. They
in the history of college football.
Possibly, that's crazy. That is, and then, seriously, that was a 3-9 team in record only. I mean, it was a team that was competitive with everybody they played. So there's a chance they finally figure it out there. And so, you can't just keep running it back, because everybody around you is getting better, and it's going to be tough for you to come out on top of this division, as maybe it was 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, and as we wrap up this part of the podcast here, I do want to we're going to talk about this a ton in the offseason, I'm sure, whenever we do offseason podcasts, but I want to talk just very briefly, kind of give a primer on Graham Mertz's future.
Sure.
Because for me, part of what Paul Chryst kind of builds this program on is the competition aspect, right? And every position's got to have competition and everything like that. I don't think you can go into, I don't know if it's spring or fall of this year, or for the 2022 season, but I don't think you can go into the 2022 season with Graham Mertz having no real competition at quarterback, unless, because like we haven't seen practice since August, but unless Deacon Hill, the freshman from this season, was astounding as a scout team quarterback, I don't know.
No.
I haven't talked about it a lot. I can't see it. Just no.
Right, just based on what we saw in fall camp, or in fall camp, you could see why they recruited him. Certainly,
right. The strong arm's there.
Yep.
But again,
but not ready.
Yeah, extremely limited reps. We don't know yet. But unless you've seen something in practice that you think he can compete, they've got to bring in a transfer. They already got their quarterback for this recruiting class. They've got to bring in a transfer to replace the scholarship of somebody that they lost. They've lost 9 guys to the transfer portal already. There's scholarships available. They've got to find a transfer quarterback. There are a ton out there. I mean, Jack Plummer's leaving Purdue. I'm not saying that's the option, but I'm just saying Deuce Hogan just left Iowa today as we're recording. So there are options out there. you've got to bring in somebody that gives a legitimate competitor to Graham Mertz going into next year, because I don't know. I'm not saying that Graham Mertz can't become good, but I don't think that putting him in a situation where he's just the de facto starter, there's no challenge to it, is the right situation either.
I think all that sounds really good in theory. I think it's going to be difficult to execute, because what's the sale to a potential recruit who you can tell him, we're going to give you every chance to win the job, but he still sees a guy that knows this system, has had 2 years starting this system, was a really highly touted recruit. So I don't know who comes here without the promise that they're going to start, unless that kid's really, really confident. Here's the game changer is if Paul Chryst gives up control of this offense and brings in an offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach, I think that's enticing to a transfer quarterback, because it's kind of a blank slate.
Right, yep.
And maybe that person that comes in even has a connection somewhere. That's the only way I see this getting done. I really have a hard time believing they're going to kick the tires in the transfer portal, as they should, but I'm skeptical that they can actually land someone decent.
Sure. No, that's definitely a fair concern, because let's face it too, if you're a quarterback that's transferring, you've already been in a situation where you weren't able to win the job. Right? So that's tough, and if you're transferring, you're probably going to want to go find some place where you feel like the path's clearer. So, yeah, you're right. This is definitely a tough sell to a quarterback, and this system's a tough sell to a quarterback. I can't imagine the most fun system to play in as a college quarterback, just because you've got so many limited opportunities, and it's just not like what we see around college football where you're throwing 40 times a game and you get a lot more chances to do things. I just wonder – I just know from a level of we've got to kind of push things here. I don't think that with the guys they had on the roster this year, Graham Mertz ever felt any pressure that it wasn't his job from day one. And I don't think you can go into what would be his now redshirt junior year, basically a senior year, without that element being there in 2022.
Yep, I completely agree. And I think I've talked myself into a little bit more the bringing in someone from the outside and changing this a little bit, just in part because I think it does create the opportunity for growth from Graham Mertz and maybe someone competing against him.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump into our Big Ten pick here. There's only one this week, but to give you guys a rundown of how we did this year, Jim went 5-2 last week. I went 4-3. On the year, I finished 57-43-2. That is a 56% win percentage. You know what they do in Vegas for 56%, Jim? They build statues, not casinos. That's actually a saying. Thank you. I think it's Tom Dinehart down in Purdue. Yeah. He's like 60% this year. He's on fire.
Wow.
Yeah. Jim is 50-49-2. A valiant effort to get in the plus side for winning, and with the pushes, 49% or 49.5% winning, but would have been up money if you bet the same amount every week. And on UW games, I went through and checked all these. I went 8-4. Skeptical Jim over here went 6-6. Huh. You called correctly every time they didn't cover, but you didn't call enough of the times it did cover for the big wins.
Interesting.
So, yeah. All right. We have the Big Ten title game here. Two pretty surprising combatants, in all honesty.
Yeah, who saw I thought maybe Ohio State, Wisconsin was probably the most likely option going into Saturday. And I think my second option would have been UW, Michigan. Yeah. But I did not see Iowa, Michigan.
And this was, I went back and checked, it was like the 8th most likely or most picked Big Ten championship game in like the preseason polls.
Wow.
So, yeah, not a lot of people expected this one. Michigan is a 10.5-point favorite against Iowa down in Indy.
I don't even know who you're picking, so this is I usually have an idea of who you're picking.
I haven't seen Iowa do anything against anyone good without turning the ball over or getting special teams. Just completely twisting the game around, not just offense versus defense. And the number one thing that Harbaugh's team has done all year at Michigan is not give things up. I know I think they had a couple of turnovers against, was it Nebraska? One of their close games had a couple of turnovers. But even that Michigan State game that they lost, that was on a turnover, but you got 10 other games where they were really good with the ball. Hassan Haskins is the beast. look at what Wisconsin did with Braylon Allen and Ches Maluzzi against Iowa, and then look at what Michigan's been doing with Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum. I think Iowa gets run off the field.
Yeah, I thought the number. I'm glad you said that because I thought the number was really, really low.
Yeah,
I mean, in part because I just don't know how Iowa scores.
Is Cade McNamara throwing 3 picks?
Yeah, well, and I wouldn't. Yeah, maybe Iowa uglifies this game and keeps it close, and maybe it's like a 17-9 or something like that. But I don't see it. I think the Michigan team is rolling and has a ton to play for yet. And I when I saw that number on the sheet, I like, wow, that's really low, and I feel really good about Michigan winning this game handily. I
do too, because you look at Michigan's got Aiden Hutchinson, who just won Defensive Player of the Year and D Lineman of the Year. David Ajobo, who's been unblockable on the edge. Iowa's tackles aren't all that good. And who's playing quarterback for Iowa?
Right.
Alex Padilla started against Nebraska on Black Friday. They brought in Spencer Petras toward the end. He kind of played better. I don't know. That game swung on a block punt, and their kicker making 4 field goals. And there's not going to be really an advantage kicking-wise because both their kickers between Michigan and Iowa are the 2 best in the conference. And when you look at the awards and such, I don't know. I'm with you. This line seemed way too low. I think Michigan's going to roll in this game. I don't think Iowa – honestly, I don't know if Iowa scores offensively because this is how well the Michigan defense has been playing and is talent-wise. I think this is a blowout.
And I think Michigan's now got the monkey off its back too, right? And they finally got past the Ohio State hurdle. I think they're going to roll. I mean, the one thing you can probably say is with the playoff on the line, there is a ton more pressure on Michigan. Iowa's got really, Iowa's kind of probably didn't think they were going to be in this game, and the pressure's off in that regard. But I don't know. I just don't see it. I think Michigan's going to roll.
Yeah. We will be back next week talking about a bowl game and a bowl opponent, all that type of stuff. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about recruiting with signing day. I don't know the timing of that signing day podcast, people, because we're going to wait till probably afterwards. So it might be a late drop in a couple of weeks. But then we'll be back talking about bowl games and all that stuff. But as you mentioned throughout the show, a ton of great Badger football and all other sport content coming up on madison.com. So make sure you're getting signed up there. I think we just had a Black Friday special. I don't think that's going anymore. But I'm sure
also
there's some
Cyber Monday special. It's not going anymore either.
Right. All right. Well, I'm sure there's some type of great deal that gets you a lot of coverage for not that much money. So please consider subscribing. Help support local journalism in that way. And thank you guys very much for listening. We'll be back next week.